Hello. If you forgot the leftover of food in a box and left it outside and then you opened it again, regardless of the bad smell, however, you will notice that there are worms and insects starting to appear inside the box. The same thing happens if you leave a fruit out of the refrigerator for several days and then come to open it. You will also find that there are worms that started to appear in it. What is the story? How do worms and insects suddenly appear like this? And what is their source? Welcome, I am Hussam, and in this episode I will answer how do worms appear inside the closed can or fruit. And before we start, if you are new in the channel, don't forget to subscribe to get our new update. The topic of appearance of worms in food, it is a phenomenon that has baffled people for hundreds if not thousands of years, to the extent that a hypothesis appeared trying to explain this phenomenon. It is called the hypothesis of self-generation. This strange hypothesis appeared for the first time by the Greek philosopher Aristotle and existed from then until the 18th century. The hypothesis says that living things can be generated naturally from some non-living bodies in the event of certain conditions, and they believed that dirt or dust could breed fleas, and that meat and proteins can generate worms. And they said that is based on watching or observation, because when they were get a piece of meat, they put it in a box and close it, and after they open the box after a while, they found worms in it. So this meat is what worms are born from. So much so that some people then come to say that snakes and crocodiles, they are born from the silt of rivers, and mice are born from a mixture of dirty clothes and wheat, because they used to find mice inside the wheat sack. Of course, this hypothesis of spontaneous generation is completely incorrect, because it's full of myth and has no scientific basis. People realize this fact after some time, and that living beings must be born from living beings as well, which is then known as the principle of biogenesis. Worms are also born based on the principle of biological reproduction. Worms that appear on decomposing foods do not appear out of nowhere, but it is generated from another organism. This organism is flies. If you look at any food and find larvae or worms on it, make sure that an insect or a fly has stood on this food at some stage and laid her eggs on it, then flew. This behavior is very common among insects, especially when they find a protein component such as meat, milk, and eggs. This is because these foods are very good food source, and the same applies to fruit and vegetables. If you open a fruit and find worms inside, make sure that a fly has laid its eggs on this fruit before. Fruits attract insects and flies because they contain sugar. Therefore, insects and flies come and try to make a hole in the surface of the fruit, and they lay their eggs inside this hole. And these eggs then hatch and turn into the worms that we see. The first scientist to discover this is the Italian scientist Francesco Rei. He conducted some scientific experiments in 1668 in order to make sure where the worm really appear out of nowhere or not. The experiment was that he brought 3 jars, put a piece of raw meat in each jar, but he left the first jar open and exposed to the air, and covered the second with a piece of gauze so that it allows the air to enter but prevent the entry of insects. And for the third, he covered it with a solid cover so that it completely prevent air from entering. And he watched these jars for several days. The first thing he noticed was that a group of flies entered the first jar, then they flew away. As for the second jar covered with a gauze, a group of flies gathered on the lid and keep trying to get into the jar, but they failed and then flew away. As for the third jar, the flies approached it and then flew away. Then after that, days later, worms appeared in the exposed jar and started feeding on the meat. As for the second jar, dead worms appeared on its gauze cover, and they were dead because there was nothing to feed on. As for the third jar, there are no worms appeared at all. And he concluded from this experiment that the worms that appear were the eggs of the flies that were hovering and entering the jars. Therefore, the closed jar didn't show any worms. After that, Francesco continued the experiment and sat watching the exposed jar, which contained worms eating a piece of meat. At first, he noticed that the worms make a brown cocoon around themselves. After a few days, the cocoon opened and small flies come out and begin to spread and move inside the jar. We conclude from this experiment any food that has worms on it, this means that there is a fly or an insect that stopped on this food at some point and left its eggs on it. Focus on this part well. If there is a tightly sealed food box and is locked with its factory lock, like cans of ready-made tuna, for example, as long as the box is closed and locked by what it come from the factory, it is impossible for you to find worms in it. But it has been expired, you may find it moldy. And mold is caused by something else. It is bacteria and fungi. It presents on all surface and in all places, even in the air. This is why some companies put preservatives in or vacuum it, because this material contains antibacterial and antifungal agents and prevent their growth. Thus, it can keep product for a long time. And after expiry date, the effect of these substances is weakened. Thus, bacteria and fungi and microbes are active again inside these closed cans. Therefore, mold may appear inside closed food boxes, but no worms appear inside it. And this is how we answer the question of how do worms appear inside the closed can or fruit. And if you are the first time to enter the channel, this channel is where we answer the questions that come to your mind while you are laying on the bed in midnight and you don't want to fall asleep. If you like the video, don't forget to like and share. And for the people who saw us for the first time, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to receive our videos once posted. And see you next episode. Goodbye.